Hey guys, and welcome to our first video here in our lecture series of Flip Video that we'll be having for AP Psychology. I wanted to start off by saying that I need you guys to make sure that what you guys are doing is watching the videos. Don't simply just go through and look at the slides and pick things off the slides, because I don't say every single thing that you guys need to know in the slides. And as a matter of fact, there will come a point where I may just put a word up on a slide and talk about it, and you guys are going to have to listen to the lecture and be able to get it. So make sure that you guys, number one, are listening to the whole lecture. Number two, you have to make sure that you are handwriting your notes. There is no exception to that. So make sure that you guys are doing that. They may not be typed. Okay, so let's get right into it. So, introduction to psychology. The first thing you should know about psychology is that it started off as a philosophy. It was not a science. It is now considered to be a science, and we will talk about that. But originally, it was a philosophy. And you had people as far back as the ancient Greeks starting to question things like, what is our mind, or what do we use our mind for, or why do people behave the way that they do, or why do people think the way that they do? So that is how it all began, as a philosophy. And to look at psychology as pre-scientific, one of the questions was, what is the relation of the mind to the body? Now, you should know that there were two different schools of thoughts that you guys can see there. So this first school of thought was that the mind and body are connected, so that if the body were to die, the mind died along with it, and that you couldn't have one without the other. The other group believed that the mind and body were distinct, that even though your body at some point may die and wither and go away, your mind could live on. And I don't mean live on through like AI and tech and stuff like we have now, but just that it was a thing which could keep thinking and could keep moving even when the body had died. So a very philosophical look at things, not a high-tech thing like you might be thinking about. The second idea here, or one of the ideas, another idea, was how are our ideas formed? Now, there was the school of thought that some of our ideas are inborn, meaning that we're born pretty much with ideas, preconceived notions that we already have. And so we're born that way, we go on that way, we're basically going to be as smart as we're ever going to be, that sort of thing. The other school of thought was this whole idea of what John Locke called tabula rasa, which meant that the mind is a blank slate, so that we're born with a blank slate. We're just totally, when we're born, there's nothing written there. And then as we form memories, as we go through things, we begin to form perceptions. So we actually begin to fill up that blank slate with all of the things that are going to make us become who we actually are. So it wasn't until later on that we see scientific psychology come into play. And the person that we're going to see this scientific psychology first begin with is Wilhelm Wundt. And yes, it is not Wilhelm, it is Wilhelm Wundt. He is the father of psychology, or considered to be the father of psychology, because of the fact that he established the first scientific laboratory in 1879 in Leipzig, Germany, that was for psychology, for the study of psychology, primarily the study of the conscious mind. Now, his theory wasn't called structuralism, which it comes to be called, until Wundt's student, who is an American, Edward Titchener, goes back to the United States, and that is where he coins the phrase structuralism. Now, you should know that I'm going to give you two theories right now, structuralism and functionalism. These are some of the earliest theories that we have in talking about psychology. Again, psychology was born as a science with Wilhelm Wundt's lab in Leipzig, Germany. Now, what is structuralism, you might ask? Well, it is basically when you are studying the mind by trying to look at what it's made of. So in other words, it's more like, okay, well, what's in there? What are the different parts of the brain that do this or that do that? And they didn't even know anything about that yet, because there was no technology to be able to see that we even had different areas of the brain, that sort of thing. So in order to try and get at these different parts of the mind, Wilhelm Wundt wanted to use a thing called introspection. Now, introspection means to look within. So basically, you would just start saying how you felt about things. He was all about these objective sensations, give you an apple, and you would have the apple and you would start to tell about, not only how the apple tasted, but what it made you feel like, that kind of thing. All right. Structure. This was ultimately doomed, however, because in psychology, you can't pay, and it's a fact of psychology, that you are not able to give your attention to more than one thing at a time. So what essentially was, that Wundt was asking people to do, was that he was asking people to actually observe themselves as they were perceiving things and as they were thinking. And you're not able to do that. So you couldn't really observe oneself. I mean, you can if you look at a mirror, but you can't really perceive and think and look at yourself in the mirror and have introspection and all these sort of things going on. You can only pay attention to one thing at a time. So ultimately, structuralism was doomed, but the biggest thing to come out of it was Wilhelm Wundt and that lab. The second one, the idea, theory, person here, William James, he wrote the first psychology textbook, and he came up with what he called functionalism. Now, functionalism came about directly opposed to structuralism. All right. So basically, William James is like, you can't, just look at the structure. We need to know what the function is going on in all of these brains and these minds. So really, functionalism was the attempt to study what the mind does, or basically what its function is. So he wanted to know things like, what function does forgetting serve? Like, why do we forget? Okay, why do we get distracted? Okay, these are all functions of the mind, but why do we have them? Why are they there? What is their specific function? And believe it or not, a lot of these things, forgetting and getting distracted, things like that, they all do serve a function, and we'll talk about them as we go further along in the course. One of the things too that James was really big on and based his theory of functionalism on was Darwin. I'm sure you guys have all heard of Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution. And James basically said, elephants have trunks. Their trunk has a function. Giraffes have necks. They serve as a function. A polar bear's fur serves a function. So he said, but what about the function of the mind? So he kind of looked at Darwin's theories and said, over time, all of these animals, all of these species had developed certain functions for certain things. Okay. And they had developed these things so that they could survive. So James really wanted to know, but what was the function of the mind, and all these different things that we did with it. So structuralism versus functionalism, these two are often opposed to each other. They're the early days of psychology. They're the first two theories that we really see come out of psychology. And we're going to be talking about the more contemporary theories later on. But one of the things that I wanted to do was just give you guys an idea of what we talk about when we're talking about structuralism versus functionalism. Okay. And this can be a question. It may be a question at some point on the AP exam, and you would have to be able to figure out what that difference is. So here's a little scenario. Imagine a structuralist and a functionalist were walking on a cobblestone street in 1900. That's 20 years after Wundt's lab and 10 years after James's textbook was first written. They come across a modern day laptop. They both recognize the keyboard and have a very, very basic idea of what it can do. So they want to study it. The question is for you guys is, how would they study this amazing machine? So take a minute, just turn off your pause me, put it that way, pause me for a second and write down. How do you think the structuralist would want to take a look at the laptop and study it? And how do you think the functionalist would want to? So pause me and then turn me back on in a second. Welcome back. So when we look at this from a structuralist and a functionalist point of view, the way that they would want to look at the laptop. The structuralist, of course, is concerned with its structure. So they're going to want to take that laptop apart to see what it's made of, to see what the structures are inside of it, as to how it works. The functionalist, on the other hand, they're going to want to press the keys, they're going to want to turn it on, they're going to want to see how it functions, they're going to see what functions it actually has and what it can do. So they're basically what my husband always says I am, which is a button pusher. So I'm always like, pushing on buttons to see what they do, which is bad. But so I guess in this sense, I would be a functionalist because I would not want to take a laptop apart. I don't care how it works. I just want it to work. So I guess I'm a functionalist.